Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Lee Artz. I'm joined today by my guest, Mark Burrows. We're going to discuss railroads in the United States and the need for public ownership. Mark Burrows started as a brakeman at the Chicago Northwestern Railroad in Chicago. It's now the Union Pacific, and he later became a locomotive engineer. Mark's been a railroad worker for 37 years, retiring in 2015. He was active in the United Transportation Union's 47-day strike in 1994 and served as a delegate for Local 1433 when the Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers Union was formed in 2014. He's been a member of the Railroad Workers United for more than 12 years. He served as co-chair and organizer in the past, and he's currently the editor of the Railroad Workers United quarterly newsletter, which is called The Highball. Thanks for joining us today, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
I think we can start by some background on what is the Railroad Workers United, how long has it been in existence, what's its purpose?
So the short version, Railroad Workers United was founded back in 2008, and that followed efforts by workers in the operating crafts, and by that I mean the engineers and trainmen, conductors, to try to get the operating craft unions, the engineers union and conductors union, unified, and then some other craft workers encouraged this motion to let's get all unified because we are separated at present by like 12 different unions, and that really inhibits our ability to. Where the carriers play one union off the other.
The railroad companies can offer a contract to one union,
and then that becomes the precedent, and that's the. And this goes way back to the when Eugene Debs formed the American Railway Union. He saw the bankruptcy of how this works, and so we are trying to follow in that tradition, and so we have members from all different crafts and all different unions, and simply trying to forge unity, solidarity, and internal democracy within our respective unions, and ultimately the ideal situation would be one big industrial union of rail workers, but in lieu of that, until we can get to there, at least to function as one united entity. So that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I should say that you can find railroadworkersunited.org, so if somebody wants to look up the thing, yes, they can get some background to it. Maybe just a tad talking about what's the difference between a craft union and an industrial union, because I know historically the AFL was always organized by the different crafts. So even if you worked at U.S. Steel, there would be like the coke haulers, there might be the people that worked on the blast furnace, there would be other crafts, construction workers. But as you said, you get broken apart, which makes it easier for the companies to play one against the other. So what makes an industrial union no longer a craft union, I guess?
So the Steelworkers Union is a classic example where all kinds of different jobs, people are doing all kinds of different things in the mill, and different titles, but they're ultimately all in the same union. And another example would be the United Auto Workers. I actually worked in an auto plant for a couple years when I was between railroad jobs, and so there's different departments. There's the paint department. There's the trim department.
And a craft union would be the painters union.
Exactly.
And they would have a local, and then there would be a construction union, and there would be where the raw body comes in and you begin to assemble it. So again, the workers in an auto assembly plant, there's all kinds of different jobs and titles, but they're all in one union. Whereas on the railroad, we have many different jobs and crafts and assignments,
but we're all divided into all these different crafts are divided into different unions, and it's really a serious impediment.
It limits the social power of railroad workers in general.
Absolutely.
Because you
Absolutely.
have these, you're breaking up. One of the things that I noticed on the principles for RWU is a big concern, a big stress on union democracy, that there should be direct elections of officers, that there should be participation in the local meetings so that they collectively decide. That's not the condition now. There's not direct elections of officers in most of the craft unions.
In most of them, most of the unions do not have direct one member, one vote.
So you don't get a ballot like you do when you go into a booth and you vote for Mark Burrows for president, or you vote for Johnny Smith for.
Right.
There's some.
And it just makes it that much harder to. We exist because we feel we need change in our unions, and this whole delegate system, compared to the one member, one vote, is really an impediment. Now, several years ago, the engineers, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, they waged a fight for one member, one vote, and they were able to conquer it. And after the last contract, they voted out the then existing president, Pierce, and so they were able to. Now,
which is more representative of the BLT. It's actually representative of what they want, as opposed to having it somewhat constrained through the delegate process.
Right, exactly. And right now there's a caucus in the Brotherhood Maintenance of Way Union, the BMWED, the track workers, and they're launching an initiative of one member, one vote, and so it's a challenge for all of us.
One of the other things I was impressed with the Railroad Workers United Principles explanation or a demand to have labor solidarity. An injury to one is an injury to all, the old IWW slogans. So what does labor solidarity look like? What does it mean? Is it just like I don't cross the picket line if the BLET is on strike? Is that something that can happen with the different craft unions? I mean, what's the expectation with labor solidarity?
Well, I'll answer that in two pieces, in two parts. When we were on strike, when the UTU was on strike in 1994, after several weeks, the BLE, and I don't need to get into the details of why and all the internal
politics, yeah.
all the internal politics and everything, but the bottom line is they threatened to cross the picket lines. They had some grievance against the UTU, and they threatened to cross the picket lines, and they were actually organizing engineers to come in on a bus, and that was one of the reasons that the UTU then chose to rather than let that scenario unfold, they chose to bring the strike to an end by threatening to put pickets up at Metra. Then that brought the Presidential Emergency Board, which they were trying to avoid doing that. They were trying to win the strike on the ground, which we were doing. But once the engineers threatened, so
that would be an indication of something that wasn't solidarity.
Exactly. So at the bare minimum, when we talk about solidarity, that's a classic example. But then in the grand scheme of things, we also mean, so in addition to solidarity within our ranks on the railroad, we know that we need solidarity with all the unions along the lines of what Shawn Fain, the president of the United Auto Workers, has talked about. We wholeheartedly support his call for all the unions to negotiate contracts so that they end on
the same time
on May 1st.
Yeah.
It escapes me exactly which year, but the very same time their contract ends, he's put out a call, he would like to see all the unions negotiate their contracts so that they all end on May Day of that year, a few years from now, 28, 29, I'm not sure, and so that if we need to take organized collective action, that we're in a better position to.
You wouldn't have to call for a national general strike. It just would happen because you're all ending without a contract on the same date.
Right. So when we say labor solidarity, both amongst the rail unions themselves in our workplace, but ultimately with the rest of our class.
One of the questions that's often raised with unions is, it seems to many, or at least the media will frame it this way, that the unions are interested primarily in their own wages and their own benefits. So the question would be, how would the Railroad Workers United, if you assemble all the craft unions into one industrial union, how is that beneficial to the common good, to the larger society, as opposed to just getting better wages and a cost of living like the UAW just got? I remember years ago when the UAW campaigned to have public housing in the city of Detroit before they were ghettoized. They did that, and workers got those benefits, so they saw a direct connection between what the UAW was asking for and what it would mean for the communities. So I'm kind of asking the same broader questions. So the Railroad Workers United, how does that represent the common good for the larger citizenry?
We certainly believe rail workers should have dignity and quality of life on and off the job. We should get paid a dignified wage for the work we do and the sacrifices we make.
And safety.
But then dignity on and off the job includes safety, which means that workers, if you had dignified work schedules, you're not going to have fatigued rail workers. And so that is a safety enhancement in and of itself. Now, while the established unions, as they are not really putting major safety issues on the table. We would. In addition to having dignified schedules so that rail workers are not fatigued, we also campaign for shorter trains, drawing a line in the sand on two-person crews, and so safety by, the incident in East Palestine is a classic example of how our fight for dignity on and off the job, as well as safe working conditions, that automatically translates to the public's interest. We have learned the hard way that the public has a vested interest in safer working conditions, both dignified scheduling as well as safer operating rules.
Yeah, one of the things I read recently is that in 2015 there were 210,000 railroad workers, and this year there's 150,000 railroad workers. So you're losing 60,000 people, which has to affect safety. I mean, everybody in this region has been at a crossing where the trains are just, you got to wait for the train to go because the train's 1.5 miles long and they've only got two crew members. I mean, you started as a brakeman. I don't know if they have brakemen on every train now, or if it's simply the engineer at one end and somebody else at the other end, but there's no...
I mean, all that's really left is the engineer and conductor.
Yeah, that's it.
And we're fighting for that, in spite of what the new FRA rule says, which is a whole nother issue. But we're fighting to hang on to that. Yeah.
So the current campaign, Railroad Workers United, is on a current campaign to get public ownership of the railroads. I know here at PNW, our American Association of University Professors passed a resolution supporting the call for public ownership of the railroads. And again, I did some background checking on this. I understand that 49 states actually have, 49 different states outside of Hawaii actually already have publicly owned railroads. They may not be run, they may be run as a profit, but they're owned by municipalities or state governments. And if we go somewhere like Switzerland or India or China, where there's actually public control, they seem to be run more efficiently and more effectively, which I would argue is probably also in the public interest. So what's the status of the current campaign? How is this being presented to the public, and how is it being advocated for?
Well, it's still very much a work in progress, but we actually we actually just launched a new website called publicrailnow.org, and there's a wealth of information and resources. It's something that we discussed for many years. Should we take a position on this? And for many years at our conventions, we would, what do we think about this? And the common sentiment was well, I'm personally for it, but I don't think we should, organizationally, I don't feel we should organizationally put ourselves out there.
Was that because they were afraid that the public perception would not be responsive to that?
Exactly, and fear of getting lumped in with concern, hesitation of getting lumped in with, but at the 2022 convention, after just precision scheduled railroading just completely, melting down, we finally said, yeah, we're ready to take this public position organizationally, and so what form that takes, what it looks like, yeah, there's varying opinions on it, and one of the whole ideas of it is that there needs to be public input. So different members of RWU have different ideas of what it could and should look like. My response is to say, let's get kind of an agreement, consensus of community, the public, and the shippers and the unions, and then let's begin to figure out the actual mechanics. But a good starting point is the Plum Plan. Back in World War I, during World War I, when the government was not satisfied with the railroad's performance, they said, you guys get out of the way, we're going to take over the railroads to run them in the service of the war, which is a whole nother, discussion. But so our basic position is not only from a safety standpoint, on-the-job fatalities, disasters like East Palestine and Lac Magentic, but also in terms of service. Over the years, with the reduced workforce, shippers, farms have trouble getting their crops to market. Shippers have trouble with the service, and one interesting statistic which just really blows our minds is from going back to about 2006. It's about 23% less freight being moved.
Oh my goodness!
Now, as opposed to what it was in 2006, and that's directly related to the reductions in the workforce. Real quickly, so when I started switching in 1974, we had a 4-man switch crew, an engineer and 3 ground people. And if you had a good crew, it could be poetry in motion. If everybody knew what they were doing, zing, zoom, zam, cars flying up and down the lead, and trains, and as it was reduced, take off the 3rd man, take off the 2nd man, and once it got down to an engineer and a conductor, and then maybe a utility man, a person who worked with this crew and this crew and this crew, and everything just slowed down. But they were making a much more higher price. They were moving less volume of freight, but making a much higher volume, a much higher rate of profit because they were moving much more freight per individual, per man hour, and so.
And that's where they're going to make their profit. The labor cost. I mean, because once you have the boxcar, the railroad, or the locomotive, once that's paid for, it's paid for. So now you just have to pay for the wages.
Right.
And you can still charge the same. I would think you could still charge the same to the shipper, to the company that wants to move goods from one place to another. You're going to charge them the same amount of money, even if it doesn't going to get there for an extra day or two, right? We're sorry for the inconvenience. You always hear. And your boxcar will be there, but it's not going to be there until Thursday. We know we told you Monday, but sorry, it's going to be there Thursday because we have problems with our crew.
Right, exactly. And so these are the kind of problems that public ownership, taking the profit motive out of the industry. Yep. I remember when I first started talking about it, and one person made the point that well, you wouldn't have UPS control the interstate system, and I just thought, yeah, that makes it. So by taking the profit motive out of the railroad industry and running the industry to meet the needs of the public, then that opens up a world of possibilities for passenger train, for moving freight efficiently, as well as safety.
So I teach communication, and one of the things we often talk about is public access to the media. Mm-hmm. And we think about something like the Public Broadcasting Service or NPR. Although they may not always be pristine in what they do, at least there is public access, and it comes from public dollars. Some of it's funded by state or national legislation, but it tends to serve more interests of the community, like the city of Chicago or Northwest Indiana. You can probably get better news from NPR and PBS than you can get from ABC or Fox or some other stations. So,
when you have much less corporate influence, I mean, the arts and the culture that you get from a public broadcasting network, there's just no comparison compared to a mainstream corporate-owned conglomerate.
Yeah. And I think of Amtrak. Again, I'm not saying Amtrak's the ideal thing, but there's an Amtrak that's, again, it's federally funded. It belongs to the public. It tends to provide fairly decent service for passengers when you can get the train, if you can fit that schedule. So.
And that's a constant battle to hang on to what we've got, much less to expand it.
Yeah, and again, I think about going to Europe or Switzerland or Italy, and how there's so many trains that are fast trains, slow trains, trains that'll stop everywhere, but there's always trains, and I don't know, part of me thinks that there's the auto industry has an interesting role to play in this, because if there's more trains, that means there's less need for individual automobiles, and that's going to cut into their own profits. But I wonder if you could just talk about what's the current status of the railroad industry. I understand there's 4 or 5 maybe major railroads that pretty much own, except the small railroads in some state or local areas. But
it's actually 6.
And so that would be Norfolk Southern,
the Norfolk Southern, the Union Pacific, the CSX. The CP,
Canadian Pacific,
Kansas City Southern, and the Canadian National,
and the Burlington Northern. What is it?
Burlington Northern Santa Fe.
Yeah. So
I
there's six companies.
Yeah.
But they're making. I understand, probably like most industries are right now, making record profits, even though they've laid off, what we say, 60,000. Rail workers, so they're going to keep all that extra money. And
30% over the last several years, so they're making uber profits, stock buybacks. Their CEOs make ridiculous seven-figure salaries, if not more. And you know, the question I've always asked, when I'd have my coworkers, hanging on for dear life to the side of a boxcar in 50, 40 below wind chill, and what do these executives do compared to that kind of work, whether it's 40 below or 100-degree plus heat index out there working? What can they possibly do to earn a fraction of these seven-figure salaries? I don't get it.
I assume that they advise the boards of Norfolk Southern and CSX and others to lay people off because your profits will go up. And then they will get rewarded for having that clever idea.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
That's pretty much it.
And that's all we have time for on our program. I want to thank Mark Burrows for joining me. I'm Lee Artz. I'll see you next time.